everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be my spoiler review for Captain America Brave New World. Now you can check out my non-spoiler thoughts before coming to this review, and I will leave a link within the description. There may be also spoilers for all other films and series within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so just beware also when going into this video. Now whilst this won't be a chronological breakdown of the movie, I will outline the elements that I think worked well and the ones that I think didn't work as well within the movie. So we'll start then with one of the most disappointing aspects of the film, which was the reveal of the leader. Now this happens near halfway through the film, where Sam and Joaquin, who is the new Falcon, have discovered that Okoye and the other shooters within the assassination attempt on President Ross have been under mind control. They go to this underground lab and see all of the experimentation technology, uncovering the conspiracy. And then we see the leader enter, which was played by Tim Blake Nelson. Now, it was around the stage that anybody or the casual viewer really needed to do their homework, as this related, of course, to the Incredible Hulk film from 2008, where in that story, the leader was Professor Samuel Stearns, who tried to help Bruce Banner cure his Hulk transformation, but ended up being contaminated himself with the gamma radiation samples. Now, leading into this story, it worked out that Stern gained huge intellect and intelligence from his contamination, and Ross had Stern apprehended, using him to blame for the rampage that was caused between the Battle of Hulk and Abomination in the 2008 film. But in secret, he used the intelligence from Stern to help him develop military technology and also look to cure his heart failure disease. In return, he would promise Stern from his incarceration. But of course, when Ross became president, he didn't do that. And then this is what set up the whole motivation behind Stern, setting up the conspiracy to ultimately damage Ross's reputation and his legacy. Now, I really was less convinced by this whole plot, as for all of his supposed intelligence, you would have felt that Stearns would have had much more of a grander ambition, as per the comic book iteration of the character. But for all of his motivation here to get revenge on Ross, he could have easily just killed him or mentally damaged him a lot sooner. And if he has the ability to mind control other soldiers, then why didn't he just manipulate Ross to free him in the first place? He basically could have had the President of the United States under his complete control, doing all of his bidding, and had control over the complete country. So his methods here really didn't prove to be sound or valid. We then look aesthetically at the way the character was portrayed, and yes, it was a very poor translation. Now yes, as a character, the leader, who is the most famous Hulk villain, has a very outlandish look with the enlarged cranium, but the way that they portrayed him here, it seemed that they were almost ashamed in terms of the actual source material. Now this approach I could understand if this film came out 25 years ago in the era of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies or the Fox X-Men films, where these comic book films still had to have some sort of grounded reality or restraint in terms of enhancing source material. But by this stage now, where we've had the likes of Thanos, the Celestials, and all of the Hulks, and now Galactus, all looking completely comic accurate, there's no excuse why they couldn't portray the leader as what he is shown within the comic books. It really should have been a non-issue. So this was a disappointing portrayal for what essentially was the third antagonist throughout the movie. So for someone who was so intelligent, and we see him throughout the film working out all of his probability of certain events, you'd assume he would have had some sort of contingency to escape, just in case his plan goes wrong. But he doesn't do that. He just shows up in front of Sam, and then when Sam realizes his plans, he just hands himself in. It really was a flat character that should have had far more menace than what he was shown throughout the story. We do then talk about the main selling point in all of the movie's promotion, which is of course the Red Hulk. Heavily shown in all of the trailers, which I think overall was a mistake to an extent, because what we basically saw in the trailers was the climactic battle. This is where we see Ross transforming after the continued taking of the pills given to him by Stearns, which again didn't really make sense, because again, if you can make Ross turn into the Hulk, then why not generate a whole army of Hulk soldiers that you can manipulate and use to your own desires? And how does the gamma powers even work by just taking the pills? Again, that really didn't make sense to me. But going back to the Red Hulk in general, we do get an extended battle between him and Sam, as we see the fight taking place throughout the White House, where we see it being smashed apart again, shown in the trailers. We then see the Hulk pursuing Sam through the forests, and Sam has to utilise the full weaponry within his Wakandian technology suit to just try to contain Hulk. We see him using various blades to cut Hulk down, and all of the energy blasts to try and blow Hulk away whenever the Hulk is pounding him down and using forces against him. Now, on the one hand, the battle I think was fine, if not a bit rushed, and it did have that weightless feel about it, that CGI chaotic feel that happens so many times within these Marvel films where you have to have the obligatory big battle finale. So for all of the frantic action, this just didn't feel very tense or suspenseful. But I am glad that Hulk was clearly the more powerful opponents, that they didn't have Sam defeat him in a one-on-one encounter, which would have been beyond ridiculous, especially when Sam doesn't use the super serum, which logically didn't make any sense. But I also wasn't convinced with the way that Sam was able to talk Hulk down. I don't think that he connected or resonated enough with Ross to be able to have the ability to do that. Now, although it would have been very cheesy and cliched, it would have made far more sense if Betty had shown up in order to calm Ross down. Now, they already had the previous moment where Betty called Ross and had shown some intention to reconnect with him, so to have Betty shown up again would have been far more appropriate. So quickly then we talk about the use of the Red Hulk, and obviously this was a character that was used to sell much more to the casual audiences. It was also an admission that Captain America as a character doesn't have any famous villains outside of the Red Skull. But of course they couldn't just have Red Hulk appear out of nowhere, so they had to build connections to the 2008 movie to provide context for the character. But I've never liked Red Hulk as an overall concept. For me and for many fans, there is only one true Hulk, which is the green version of course. And I think when you have all of these other Hulks, whether it's the Red Hulk or the Grey Hulk or She-Hulk or any other Hulk, it just takes away the overall uniqueness of the original character. We'll then talk about the third antagonist throughout this film, which was Giancarlo Esposito Sidewinder, who was the leader of the Serpent Society. Now, of course, Esposito is a truly great actor, so expertise at playing that more articulate, intelligent villain with that quiet menace. But in this film, he really was underutilized because I felt he was very good in the scenes that he was in. Whether it was the beginning scene of the film, where he was threatening the hostages in his fortress, or whether he attacked Sam in the street later on, a sequence that was very similar to the Nick Fury ambush that what we saw in Winter Soldier. But this was a character that was good, but overall very short-lived. And I still have a very strong feeling that he was the intended original villain, not Red Hulk or the leader. This was going to be, I think, a much more smaller scale, character-driven story, much more ethnically orientated, just like Black Panther, and then likely got changed due to the test audiences. But I think that's overall such a shame, who probably wanted much more of an explosive comic book adventure. We'll then refer to what's been the most glaring question or omission ever since Phase 4, and that is Tiamut. Now, if you saw Eternals, you'll know exactly what we're talking about here. This is where in the climax of that film, we had all of the heroes defeat the Celestial, which saw his body turn to stone or ice, and due to his enormous size, this resulted in his hand and his helmet sticking right out in the Earth's atmosphere. Now, this is something that has become mocked or memed for several years now, as it was never addressed throughout phases 4 or 5. How could it be that you have this massive hand sticking out of the Earth and nobody, especially anybody within the Avengers, never noticed or drew reference to it? But it's finally addressed in this film, and they did attempt to make it much more central to the plot by the fact that the metal from the Celestial was mined or reconfigured into the famous substance known as Adamantium. The Celestial Tiamut himself was relocated into Celestial Island. Now, of course, if you know your comic book lore, or even if you're just a casual viewer, we all know that Adamantium was fused into Wolverine's human skeleton. And Adamantium was something that Marvel couldn't use at the time because back then Wolverine and the X-Men properties were owned by Fox. So this led them to go to Vibranium, which linked to Wakanda. So whether this was a case of them finally having to address Tiamut and the Celestials from the Eternals, or whether it was early precursors to the eventual introduction of the X-Men, or it might have just been because they eventually wanted to go away from Vibranium, because as that's still owned by Wakanda, every time they use Vibranium they have to reference it. We saw this with Sam Wilson himself, the fact that his suit was made by Vibranium, so again we have to make reference to Wakanda. So by introducing Adamantium now, they can have further armoured suits and technology without having to constantly draw reference to Black Panther or Wakanda in the future. They even say this in the seen during President Ross's conference speech. So whether we'll see the mention of adamantium later on in the Marvel movies or the television series remains to be seen. We'll then talk about the cameo appearances, and the first one being the appearance of Bucky Barnes, who visits Sam in the hospital overlooking the new Falcon, who was severely injured in the air battle where both him and Sam had to combat the mind-controlled pilots. Now this admittedly was a surprise to see Bucky. Now of course this made sense following the story from the Falcon and Winter Soldier, which saw both Sam and Bucky team up together against international terrorists. Now in terms of this movie itself, it really was only the one time that we saw any introspection from Sam about his ability to be Captain America. And I think overall the importance of Captain America and the presence of the hero wasn't really referenced too much throughout this film. It basically just starts off with Sam in the costume and then we just roll on from there. And I think that was something that was deliberate because, as we all know, there was a huge backlash from fans who didn't like the fact that Sam indeed took over the mantle from Steve Rogers at the end of Endgame. Many of them believed it should have been Bucky, and I completely agree with this. But essentially in this scene, Bucky gives Sam a pep talk about how he believes he can be the right Captain America. Now overall I had two queries here. The first one being that we find out that Bucky is now running for congressman. And that's quite the advancement from this character from where we saw him last at the end of the Falcon and Winter Soldier, where basically he admitted that he had assassinated somebody who he had known throughout that story, and then we just see him walking away. Now yes, we could argue that he was pardoned from his role as a fugitive from the events of Captain America Civil War, but it's still a stretch to see him all of a sudden being involved in Congress. So I did wonder why exactly Bucky didn't stay and assist Sam, as he was clearly aware of what's going on. If he is in Congress, didn't he have any further connections that might have been able to aid Sam further in finding out the overall conspiracy? Now Bucky running for congressman is fine, I suppose. It continues the overall redemption of the character. But what does it then say about his role in the upcoming Thunderbolts movie, where we see Bucky is clearly working with the rogue, misfit, anti-heroes team? Now he wouldn't have much time to spare for any congressman duties if he's working alongside the likes of Yelena Belova and Red Guardian. So I can only assume that Thunderbolts is some sort of prequel story to Brave New World. Maybe it takes place shortly after the events of Falcon and Winter Soldier, where we see what happens to Bucky, and then at the end of that film we'll probably see Bucky making the decision to run for Congress. We'll then move to the second brief cameo, which was Liv Tyler as Betty Ross, again tying back to the 2008 Hulk film, and her strained relationship with Ross from that story was furthered within this film here. And I think overall it was a fine moment. I think Liv Tyler still looked very good, very beautiful in this shot here that we see her in. And it was consistent with the whole working of the dynamic of Ross's character, where we saw throughout the story he was struggling to make amends and was remorseful that his actions had caused his separation with Becky. So I didn't have no issue here. It was a cameo that made sense in terms of the story that they were telling here. So we will quickly talk of the film's ending. As I mentioned before, the climatic battle we had between Red Hulk and Sam Wilson, where Sam Wilson eventually calms Red Hulk down after making reference to Becky. We then see that the treaty is then eventually withheld after we find out that the soldiers were indeed mind controlled and that President Ross wasn't behind the stealing or the attempted stealing of the adamantium. Because of his transformation as the Hulk, President Ross had to step down from his position, and we see him trapped in the same prison that what we saw many of the characters apprehended in Captain America Civil War. And all of this revelation, of course, generates the release of Messiah, and then we end the story where we see some back and forth banter between Sam and Falcon in a hospital. We then have the end credit scene, which many people have rightly stated is really nothing, where we just see Sam approaching the leader who's also been incarcerated, and he warns Sam that there are other worlds and other beings that will soon come into play. This is probably likely leading to what we'll supposedly see in Avengers Doomsday, where we're going to see variants of other characters, where we assume the whole multiverse will come to a halt. Again, this had the look of a scene that was probably hinted at early in the film, and it just felt tacked on at the end of an end credit scene. Nothing too special. And I think at this stage, the end credit scenes have really kind of lost their luster, and there's no real point in having them in the future if Marvel isn't going to try and make them special or exciting to get us anticipating the next movies that are coming ahead. So there's my overall spoiler thoughts and review of Captain America Brave New World. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any other further movies, television series, or any other topics or issues within the entertainment scene that you'd like to see me cover within the channel, then also let me know within the comments, and I will see if I can provide further commentary for you on that subject matter within the future. Please also hit like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you very, very soon.